Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're stepping way outside the box to unpack a really fascinating grand unified thought experiment. We're diving deep into a framework known as the Unified Theory of Geologic History, or UTGH, as proposed by author Darrell Waters in his book, Earth, a Biography of Chaos. Now, this explainer is going to challenge some of the most basic assumptions we hold about the history of our planet. We're going to break down some incredibly complex physical, biological, and astronomical anomalies that mainstream science sometimes struggles to explain. Okay, let's just dive right into it. Picture this. How in the world did an animal weighing 250 kilograms, we're talking the size of a small airplane here, how did it actually achieve powered flight from a dead stop? Under today's laws of physics and aerodynamics, this really shouldn't be possible. Yet the fossil record tells us it happened. We're talking about an animal whose skeletal architecture was undeniably built to fly. It's a huge problem. Quetzalcoatlus northropi had a crazy 11-meter wingspan and weighed 250 kilos. To put that in perspective, the absolute maximum limit for flying animals in our current atmosphere, birds like the Andean condor or the Cory bustard, is just 12 to 18 kilograms. Because the math literally just doesn't work out under our modern sky, some scientists have actually started reclassifying this giant pterosaur as a flightless, ground-stalking predator. But Darrell Waters proposes a totally different approach. What if the animal isn't the anomaly, but the atmosphere is? And this paradox doesn't just stop in the sky. It brings us right to our second huge biological anomaly. Just imagine a sauropod, a massive 100-ton dinosaur standing there on four legs with a neck reaching 10 meters straight up into the air. Honestly, the sheer mechanics of it just existing are absolutely baffling. How on earth could a creature that massive pump blood all the way up to its brain under today's gravity and air pressure? Well, the cardiovascular math is where things get really wild. Think about a giraffe, right? It has the highest blood pressure of any living mammal today, sitting at about 280 millimeters of mercury, and its neck is only 2 meters long. To pump blood up a 10-meter neck, a sauropod would need a blood pressure of almost 700 millimeters of mercury. That is so high, it would literally rupture every known biological blood vessel. So Waters captures his whole methodology perfectly with this thought. Start with the anomaly, not with the framework. He argues that when physical evidence directly contradicts our accepted models, the standard millions of years of gradual uniform change, we shouldn't just tweak the animal's behavior to save the theory. We should follow the physical evidence. Instead of inventing workarounds for why an animal built for flight couldn't actually fly, or why a dinosaur couldn't lift its own head, we really need to ask, were the physical conditions of their world just fundamentally different? Which brings us to Section 1, the pre-flood world, a framework proposing different physical laws. This is the first major premise of the UTGH. The author proposes a radically different ancient Earth environment that naturally and elegantly solved these biological constraints without requiring special pleading or weird behavioral loopholes. Let's look at how this proposed world actually operated. Today, we live at 1.0 atmospheres of pressure with about 21% oxygen. Waters calculates a totally different pre-flood atmosphere, one sitting at 1.5 to 2.0 atmospheres of pressure, with oxygen cranked way up to 30 or 35%. This denser, highly pressurized, oxygen-rich sky would basically act like a biological amplifier. It gives that 250-kilogram Quetzalcoatlus the exact aerodynamic lift it needs to fly, and it creates an external compressive squeeze, almost like a full-body compression suit, giving a sauropod the venous assist required to keep its heart from just blowing out. And we see evidence for this shifted size ceiling all over the fossil record. These proposed conditions would allow completely different body plans to just grow absolutely massive. An African elephant tops out at around 6 tons today, but sauropods were hitting 100 tons. Mainstream science already agrees that the massive 70-centimeter Meganeura dragonfly existed because of super high oxygen levels way back in the Carboniferous period. Waters is just saying, hey, let's apply that exact same principle of a dense, oxygen-rich atmosphere across the board to explain all the giant biology of the past. But the clues aren't just in the bones, they're actually hiding in the trees. In this proposed pre-flood world, there were no seasons, no harsh winters, no massive droughts, just a dense, humid atmosphere constantly watered by a heavy daily dew. Because of this, Waters puts forward a really fascinating hypothesis. He predicts that if you look at the oldest giant sequoias on Earth, at their very core, you'll find what he calls pre-seasonal wood. This would be timber completely free of annual growth rings, because remember, tree rings are actually caused by seasonal stress. He argues that archived cross-sections of these ancient trees contain a visible, highly testable boundary where the world literally shifted from a seasonless paradise to the harsh seasonal cycles we experience today. Of course, we clearly don't live in that world anymore. The sky is thinner, gravity is slightly different, and the giants are long gone. So what happened? That brings us to Section 2, the rupture event, when a pressurized planet failed. We're shifting gears now from biology to a massive geological catastrophe. The text describes the end of this world not as some giant rainstorm, but as a catastrophic three-step structural failure of the planet itself. The idea is that beneath the Earth's granite crust sat this enormous pressurized ocean of water. Over billions of cycles, the moon's gravity kept pulling and flexing the Earth's crust. Think of bending a paperclip back and forth until it finally gets completely fatigued and snaps. When the crust finally gave way, a massive fracture ripped through the rock at an insane 3.5 kilometers per second. In a matter of hours, this crack unzipped completely around the globe, creating the massive scar we now know as the mid-oceanic ridge. Now, when that crack finally reached the subcrustal reservoir, the result was absolutely mind-blowing. The water down there wasn't just hot. It was what physicists call supercritical water. It was trapped under 30 to 40,000 atmospheres of pressure. At pressures that extreme, water physically cannot boil, no matter how hot it gets. So the second the crust fractured and exposed this hyperpressurized chamber to the surface, the water didn't just bubble up like a hot spring. It underwent a massive, explosive phase transition. It basically detonated. And you really have to grasp the sheer violence of this release. The math in the text calculates that this explosive mixture of water, superheated steam, and pulverized rock blasted up out of the crust at velocities between 47 and 93 kilometers per second. We're talking about a sustained hypersonic jet of unimaginable power. To put those numbers into perspective, Earth's escape velocity, the exact speed you need to travel to break free of Earth's gravity and fly off into space, is only 11.2 kilometers per second. So this rupture event didn't just flood the surface of the planet. It was shooting an unfathomable amount of planetary mass directly out of our atmosphere and straight into open space. And that massive loss of material leads right into Section 3, a faster, smaller Earth, the mathematics of a collapsed crust. Because so much mass left the interior of the Earth, the physical shape of our modern planet was completely altered. Think about it. Once all that pressurized water was gone, the massive weight of the rock crust above it had absolutely nowhere to go but down. The entire crust collapsed inward. Waters calculates that the pre-flood Earth was actually about 46 kilometers larger in radius. Because it was a wider planet, the surface gravity was slightly lower, sitting at about 9.68 meters per second squared. That slightly lower gravity, mixed with the dense atmosphere we talked about, gave those giant dinosaurs the perfect conditions to thrive. But when the crust collapsed, the Earth shrank and the surface gravity spiked up to the 9.78 meters per second squared that we feel today. Now, this is where the framework offers what is probably its most stunning mathematical connection. What happens when a spinning object suddenly shrinks? It's just like an ice skater pulling her arms in during a spin, right? She spins faster. When the Earth's crust collapsed inward, the entire planet's rotation sped up. Our year went from exactly 360 days down to 365.25 days. And the wildest part? This isn't just some abstract math equation, it's literally recorded in human history. Because of the conservation of angular momentum, the Earth spun faster, making each individual day slightly shorter. Every single major ancient calendar, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Maya, the Veda calendars, they all originally featured a perfectly round 360-day year. Later on, every single one of them had to suddenly amend their calendars by adding 5 extra intercalary days, because the sky no longer matched their ancient records. The author argues those 5 extra days aren't just a rounding error, they are the literal historical scar of the Earth's crust collapsing. Which brings us to our final act, Section 4, Scars in the Solar System, where the missing mass went. Let's zoom way out for a second. If a massive subterranean ocean was just blasted into space at up to 93 kilometers a second, where on Earth, or rather where in space, did it all go? Waters argues that this event left a massive crime scene scattered across our entire solar system. For example, look at the moon. The near side is covered in a pulverized regolith that's totally asymmetrical compared to the far side. Mars has these massive polar ice caps and underground water that really shouldn't be there based on its size and distance from the early solar nebula. Jupiter's moon Europa is just covered in a massive ocean of water while its neighbor Io is bone dry. And Saturn's rings, they're made of pristine, geologically young water ice. The framework proposes that all of these weird anomalies are the direct splash damage, essentially the frozen shrapnel, of Earth's massive rupture event. And here is the absolute kicker. This is fully testable today. The framework points to a chemical fingerprint known as the deuterium to hydrogen ratio, or the D/H ratio. Deep subcrustal water here on Earth has a very, very specific D/H ratio. By testing the ice we find in asteroids, comets, and even on Mars, we can look for this exact isotopic signature. If the water out there in space matches the deep water of Earth, and not the primordial solar nebula, it would strongly suggest it originated from our planet's rupture event. And the crazy thing is, we have the probe data and the samples to test this right now. All of this leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought. All across the globe, totally independent ancient cultures share identical memories of a great flood, of giant animals, of a sky that looked different, and of people who lived incredibly long lives. So what if we've been way too quick to just dismiss these as simple myths? What if instead they are the accurate, literal logs of a fundamentally different world? A world with a denser sky, slightly lower gravity, and a highly pressurized crust that ultimately failed. It's a framework that really challenges us to look at the anomalies in the rocks, the fossils, and the stars with a totally fresh sense of curiosity. It definitely makes you want to dig deeper, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep asking those big questions.